Africa has the world's fastest growing economies. And at Construct Africa, we want to prove to the world the opportunities that exist on this continent. Sub-Saharan Africa is open for business, as proven by the growth in the construction industry, even during the pandemic. Now, post-COVID, there are millions of dollars available to companies ready to make the most of the opportunities available. In countries like Ghana and Tanzania, Kenya and Nigeria, huge infrastructure projects in power, transport, and energy are kicking into gear. Can your business afford to not know about these opportunities? The Construct Africa website is designed to provide the most up-to-date information and news about Africa's expanding construction industry. You won't miss out on information your company needs to grow in Africa by signing up to our newsletter at ConstructAfrica.com. Construct Africa, building a better Africa.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the globe. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here. My name is Segun Faniro, and I'm the publisher of the Construct Africa platform. For those who don't know Construct Africa, we provide news and analysis on construction, infrastructure, and the built environment in Africa through our website at www.constructafrica.com. Today's webinar is the first in our Building a Better Africa webinar series, and the topic for today's discussion is the future of construction in Sub-Saharan Africa. During the webinar, you can submit questions through the Q&A function, and there'll be a Q&A session at the end of the panel discussion, during which the panelists will answer questions that have been submitted. There will also be polled surveys which will pop up on your screen as we progress through the webinar. And you're encouraged to respond to the polls. I'll be announcing the results as we move along through the session. Now, without further ado, I will introduce our distinguished panelists for today's webinar. Liz Baines. Liz is the Chief Content Officer for Construct Africa. In her role as the Chief Content Officer, she has editorial oversight for news analysis on the construction industry in Africa. And this gives Liz unique insights into current trends in the construction industry in Sub-Saharan Africa, which she'll be sharing with us today. You're welcome to the webinar, Liz.
Thank you.
Igwan Okaisebo. Igwan is the founder and CEO of Construction Kesa, a construction firm in Nigeria that is renowned for focusing on excellence in business practice and project delivery. Igwan is also the president of the Nigerian-German Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the webinar, Igwan.
Thank you, Segun. Thank you.
Claire Barclay. Claire is infrastructure projects partner at the law firm Pinsent Masons and is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. She has extensive expertise in providing project advisory services on infrastructure and construction projects throughout Africa. Welcome to the webinar, Claire.
Thank you, Segun. Lovely to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Petra Devro. Petra is the Sub-Saharan Africa Regional Manager at the Chartered Institute of Building, CIOB, which is a global professional body for construction management, as well as leadership and professional development in the construction industry. Welcome to the webinar, Petra.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody.
Lucy Chege. Lucy is the head of project and infrastructure finance at the Eastern and Southern Africa Trade and Development Bank, TDB. She brings in-depth knowledge and experience in infrastructure project finance right across Africa. Welcome to the webinar, Lucy.
Thank you, Segun.
Jose Miranda. Jose is Regional Director for Angola and Mozambique, Zutari, an engineering and infrastructure consulting firm that's growing its presence across Africa. Jose is also the Grow Africa leader at Zutari, championing the growth of the firm in Africa markets. Welcome to the webinar, Jose.
Thank you very much. Big pleasure to be with you.
Last, but certainly not the least, we have with us Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin, OBE. Dr. Ogunshakin is the CEO of the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, FIDIC, based in Geneva, Switzerland. FIDIC is an international standards organization for construction technology and consulting engineering, and they are widely known across the globe for the FIDIC suite of contracts, which is used on construction projects across the world. Welcome to the webinar, Dr. Ogunshaki.
It's a pleasure to join you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Welcome. All right, to kick off discussions, I will now invite Liz Baines to give an overview of current trends, opportunities, and challenges in the construction industry in Africa. The floor is yours, Liz.
Thank you, Shagil. So I think everyone agrees that Africa is a continent of immense opportunity for the construction industry. The region has a huge infrastructure deficit that needs to be overcome, and I'll quickly run through some statistics to illustrate the size of the deficit. 61% of people in Africa lack access to safely managed drinking water. 73% do not have access to safely managed sanitation. More than 50% of people in Sub-Saharan Africa live without access to electricity. 48% of people in East Africa live in slums and informal settlements. Nigeria's housing deficit alone is calculated at 28 million units. Just 47% of roads in Africa are paved. The African Union estimates that 100,000 kilometers of new roads need to be built by 2030 to provide effective intercontinental connectivity. And according to the African Union, the poor state of infrastructure currently translates into about a 2% reduction in GDP each year in most African nations, and as much as a 40% decrease in industrial productivity. Investment is needed in ports, airports, railways, energy, health, education, housing, renewables, drainage, sanitation, right across the board. And these are the opportunities today, I think, for construction companies in Sub-Saharan Africa. But the challenges are equally great. We see the same challenges arising again and again. Access to finance and political instability are the most obvious ones. But there's also the problem of corruption and construction mafia, delayed payments from government clients, currency risk, and limits on capital flows. There can sometimes be logistical problems too in reaching project sites due to poor state of transport networks. The availability of local materials and skilled labor can also be a challenge. Community engagement is a critical element of project delivery in Sub-Saharan Africa. And building collapses seem to be a frequent daily event in Nigeria, which raises questions for me about the quality of construction. But the good news is that funding is flowing into Africa through development finance institutions, which are lending more than ever to the continent. A lot of work is also going on behind the scenes to present projects that are bankable and lower risk for those involved. They're also advising governments on policy reforms and training young Africans in project management and contract management skills, and building up a track record for PPPs. Research and technological development is resulting in innovations such as modular construction using 3D printing, which I think could be a game changer for Africa. A move towards regional integration, coupled with the mining boom, is creating the impetus for a wave of investment in transport infrastructure, ports, roads, and railways. Uganda, meanwhile, is planning to add 52 gigawatts of power capacity by 2040. Ghana has drawn up a 550 billion net zero transition plan, and Namibia wants to be the green hydrogen capital of Africa. The opportunities are immense and there's a lot to discuss, so I'm not going to take any more time, and I'll hand over to you and our panel of experts.
Thank you very much, Liz. Thanks for those insights. Liz has talked about challenges pretty much across all sectors. She's due to the deficits in infrastructure in Africa, there's opportunities abound pretty much everywhere. She specifically talked about opportunities in transport, roads, railways, energy, but also green energy. The use of technology also presents opportunities for innovation as well. She's also raised issues regarding the challenges, finance, delayed payments, logistics, currency risk, skilled labor, and she mentioned as well the issues of corruption and the quality of work. I'll now call on the other panelists to respond very briefly to what Liz has said. So I'll start with Ibuan.
Thank you very much, Segun. Thank you so much. Listening to the data that Liz just released is scary, because you ask, who's going to develop the infrastructure in Africa? That leads me to the issue of talent migration. So talent migration sometimes could be a good thing, but when you don't have enough people, and then the few people you have are moving across the Mediterranean Sea because of poor living conditions, increase in population, unemployment, then you ask, who is really going to build the critical infrastructure that Africa needs? So in Nigeria, it's been very prevalent of recent. It's now, if it's been codenamed Japa culture. Japa means to flee. So young Africans are fleeing the continent because they are looking for better education, better healthcare, job opportunities. It could be a good thing, but then when you don't have enough people to get the work done, then it now becomes a bad thing. On the flip side, the developed world, the Western world, they have an aging population, and the population is even in decline. And that's resulting in a reduced workforce. So they need people. And they're taking advantage of what's happening in Africa to recruit across the Mediterranean Sea and even all the way to Canada. So Canada, the UK, Germany, even Australia, they're all coming to Africa to pick talent. So the question now comes, who's going to develop our infrastructure? So what I think is that we need to have a structured way of training. We need to train people, enough people, such that even when some people leave, we still have some people to remain here to build the infrastructure. So government has to play a major role in this area to make sure, I mean, you can't stop people from leaving the country. Yes, you can't. But then it has to be done in a structured way such that the host country doesn't lose all their talent. We've seen this happen in all sectors, in the medical sector, but now it's really, really affecting the construction sector. And if we don't do something about it, in the coming years, we're not going to have the talent we need to develop our infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibuan. I forgot to mention that from time to time, polls will be coming up. A poll has come up, so please respond to the poll. And I'll, from time to time, as I said, I'll be announcing the results of the poll. Anyway, thank you very much, Ibuan. Ibuan has raised the issue of talent migration and its effects on the construction industry. I'll now go on to Jose for his response and comments to Liz.
Yeah, thank you very much. I definitely have to agree with a number of the comments that Ibuan has already made. I think bottom line for me, if we just start unpacking a little bit of what is it that has changed. I've been in this industry and worked over 42 countries in the continent of Africa. And I go back to exactly when I was a very young engineer, and I reflect on the different changes that have taken place in the continent throughout my career. And I think it is clear to me that there's been quite a lot of ups and downs, but there are some commonalities or common factors that certainly influence and challenge the construction industry. One of them has always been, and we've all felt it, is the way and the methods with which we finance projects. And that has always been very challenging right through the continent. We have different mechanisms. We've got funding agencies. We've got governments assisting, but it's always been a challenge. And I think lately, the last 4 years, this has really become, again, quite a prominent factor influencing the development of construction. So when there's money around, we see the cranes in Lagos. We see the ports being developed in East and West Africa, and all of a sudden we see a lot of things standing still. Now we go back and we say, what is it that is influencing the lack of funding? And it is quite clear that the governments in general in Africa are being tainted by a number of constraints when it comes to financing. So their own fiscal sustainability, and that goes about repayment of loans, has become seriously constrained. I think the exchange rate pressures have created, in a way, debt resolutions for the countries that are unsustainable. And that really places quite a lot of strain on any government to implement and to proceed with further programs. And normally, when a government starts showing distress in financing big public projects, then we also see quite a bit of the private sector losing the same enthusiasm around development of projects. So I think in general the opportunities are there. There's a lot of big projects in the continent. There's great stuff going on. I'm glad Liz touched on the energy side. Really, we are experiencing as an organization that we are really constrained in terms of people, and there I have to say that the talent migration is also complicated. Our organization employs just over 2,000 engineers, and we are finding it difficult to keep them in the continent. And so the energy projects are really ongoing, and with that, there's a whole host of developmental corridors that are also requiring a lot of engineering and assistance. So absolutely, I just want to leave it there that project finance and the availability of funds to do these large projects that stimulate the economies is currently a very big challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. Jose has emphasized the issue of project finance. I'll just move on to the next person because of time. I'll call on Petra now to give her response. Thank you.
Thank you, Segwan. Yes, I absolutely concur with my colleagues, Igwan and Jose. In terms of the brain drain and basically the professionals that are leaving the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa is undoubtedly one of the biggest challenges that we're facing. But in saying that, we, as a professional membership organization, what we are seeing is that there is a lot more interest from a lot of the governments across the region to engage with professional membership bodies like ourselves, to start looking at how that we can engage and collaborate with them, to look at policy and look at how we can start how they can start introducing policies around professional membership, how they can learn from international best practice, so that from a young age, scholars can start learning more about health and safety, everything around the built environment, which I think is already starting to show a step in the right direction. And obviously it does take a long time for these things to come to fruition, but it definitely is a positive step. And in saying that, we've been able to start these types of engagements, which will obviously bear fruit in the future. A lot of our members have also shown a lot of progress in areas such as the data centers and adoption of new technologies in the region. And what we've also seen is, the investments from large corporates internationally. And what we've noticed is that comments from members across the region is the importance of belonging to professional bodies, so that we actually are showing professionalism in the built environment, so that we can actually have an attractive labor force in the sense of professional members that are able to demonstrate the ability to these big corporates that are wanting to invest in the region. And I think if we're able to do that, we can then attract more and more investment into the region. And hopefully then we can assist in actually having the capacity to develop this infrastructure that is so desperately needed, that Liz was referring to. So I think there are many opportunities. It's just a case of how do we best harness it. And as Jose was saying, the funding models are critical to this as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Petra. Petra has also highlighted the issue of talent and sort of touched on talent migration. It's really good to hear that the CIOB is actually collaborating with governments in the development of policy to address the issue of talent across Africa. Thank you very much, Petra. I'll call on Lucy now.
Thank you, Segun.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to respond to is the issue really about the bankability of projects, because whilst we do see that there are projects, I think I agree, there's a lot of work out there, and there are a lot of projects that are there, but in many cases, from a funding point of view, they are not yet bankable. So there's a need, again, it goes to also the capacity issue, to get people to put them into a bankable stage so that they can be then assessed by funders. So that's some of the gap that we're seeing. And it is also driven by lack of people, because you need people to package them, have the continuous dialogue with the banks and the various investors so that they're in a format that can then be actually utilized by the funders for obtaining finance. So I really agree in terms of the skills issue. I think it's something that is quite prevalent wherever you go. It is there. And it's something that would need to be discussed and addressed continuously. It can't end very quickly because of the macro factors at play. But if we can increase the number of bankable projects, then that would also assist in accessing the funding that is there. So I think that is what I would want to add to the conversation.
All right, thank you very much, Lucy. It's very interesting how you linked the issue of availability of skills or shortage of skills to the issue of project finance in terms of the requirement for the skills to actually develop these bankable projects, or the bankability of the projects, so to speak, which is very interesting. There's been lots of talk about the bankability of projects and about the fact that whilst there's that deficit of infrastructure, the money is kind of there. I'm sure it's not all there, but there is money available. But that money can't be accessed because the projects are not able to be packaged and formulated in a bankable manner. Yeah. Thanks, Lucy. I'll now call on Claire.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Segun. And thank you to all the other panelists as well as Liz. I thought what I would do, rather than focus on a particular principle of how a challenge system could be fixed, is maybe just pick up on one or two things that Liz mentioned around sort of trends that we've experienced in the last sort of 12 months, what we're seeing going on with our construction and our infrastructure projects, which I think will ultimately solve for some of the issues that we're seeing arise. So I think a couple of things that I just wanted to mention was that certainly on our infrastructure projects, we're still seeing that they're very much led through a DFI financed platform. Because of the number of challenges that we've already spoken about, and that there's still very much a strong role for DFIs, and the issue around bankability is precisely because DFIs can take a more robust look at projects at the end of the day. So that's most certainly the case for the projects that we're seeing. I mean, just to really focus on maybe one or two sectors, and Liz had mentioned, the net zero transition agenda. We really are seeing a lot more of those sorts of projects come up in the African continent around energy security projects, food security projects, and then obviously climate adaptation and mitigation projects as well. So there really is a huge appetite from a lot of contractors in those sectors. They're prepared prepared to put some risk capital in, but again, it largely needs to be underwritten by DFIs and governments. Although I think Jose made the point that governments are quite strained at the moment. Their debt to GDP levels are high. They're still recovering from the COVID years, and so funding is a challenge. But that doesn't stop the appetite and the interest from the contractor market, and we're certainly seeing a lot of that. Maybe the last observation, just to pick up on what Liz introduced, is that we're seeing an uptick in the number of cross-border or regional projects that are taking place around sort of network infrastructure industries, be it in the transport sector or transmission as well. And for me, what that means is that there's actually greater connectivity that's happening between regional groupings and between governments as well. And I think that's a really important, that's an important indicator of a more maturing continent. You know, despite all the challenges, and we're definitely aware of them, what we're seeing more of is cooperation regionally in regional economic blocks as well. And I think that's really encouraging. Thanks, Shagan.
Thank you, Claire. Just an observation on what Claire just said regarding the tick in cross-border sort of projects. I wonder whether that's related to the AFTA, FTA, whether there's any sort of connection there. I suppose that's a topic for another day, but I don't know. What do you think, Claire? Do you think that there's any relationship there?
Yes, I definitely do. I mean, the African Free Trade Agreement has certainly set down a very clear and robust set of rules to encourage trading between different African governments. And I think it's that mindset, it's that thinking that we're seeing mature and translate into projects, and also projects where work is being done to make those projects bankable. So rather than just focusing on the challenge, looking at how we can achieve those projects in innovative ways. So undoubtedly at that sort of regional and also sort of international level, that's been a big driver for those sorts of projects, quite right.
Thank you very much. I'll now call on Dr. Ogunshakin.
Well, thank you very much. I think my colleagues already covered most of the point that needs to be said about what I call the symptoms of why we have challenges in Sub-Saharan Africa. But let me just elevate the conversation to the next level. And I think, it's fair to say that, the points raised by each and every speaker are really valued, and I fully support them. But I think if we take it to the next level, we talk about the future of the construction in Sub-Saharan Africa. But what construction is really about infrastructure. And therefore, if you ask me, I think the big issue that I see is lack of clear leadership. That is really that we need to address in Africa, because you can take that across the whole of the continent, or you take it at the sub-region level or at the national level. And I think lack of leadership is a critical one that is really hindering us. And then I go with that, a lot of the stuff that's been talked about is really about lack of capacity. Because capacity building covers skills, cover institutional knowledge, cover process, procedure, planning, the whole of that brings together. And against that backdrop, to me, is what is the vision for us? Because everything that we've been talking about, whether it's the skill migration, that's a short-term issue. Is really how do we bring that together? And I just feel, yes, all those points that's been mentioned earlier, I don't need to go over them. They're absolutely valid. Every point that's been talked about, bankability of all of that. But against that backdrop, for any investor that wants to come to the country or to the continent, wants to know issue that you don't have all the points we raised about transparency, institutional process, capacity building, that we have that resilient. And at the moment, we seems to be just jumping on what is on the table for the short-termism that the politicians are in office for, looking for the photo opportunity. Nobody's looking for the long-term issue. Nobody's looking at joined-up thinking. There is no true cross-country or geo-country thinking about what does Africa need. No, so I thought I should raise that conversation to that level. I'm not dismissing everything that's been said. I fully agree with all that's been said. But I think the big challenge is we don't have a clear vision in Africa. We don't have a clear leadership, at country, at national level, at state level. Everybody's very much into short-term driven photo opportunity rather than, what is the legacy that we want to live on. And whether it's the issue of bankability of a project, all those issues are critical. But I think in my mind, I take them as a basket of issues that without clear leadership across the continent, without political will, without strong institutional capacity at national, at regional level, and at state level, and at operating level, we will continue to struggle. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Dr. Ogunshakin for that very insightful comment. Dr. Ogunshakin has added, or rather emphasized, the issue of leadership as being sort of the umbrella that is required to be addressed, following which all the others sort of come into place. So yeah, well, the issue of leadership is a, shall I say, perennial problem, perennial issue that has been talked about in quite a number of forums regarding economies and the development of Africa. And that it's been brought up in terms of the future of the construction industry, I think is rather very pertinent as well. Thank you very much. Well, I will now go on to sort of the next phase, so to speak, of the webinar, which is to discuss some successful projects that have taken place on the continent. So whilst we have these challenges, whilst these issues are definitely there, we just want to have some insights into what might have been successful in and across the board. So I'll start by calling on this time Petra to give us perhaps an insight into perhaps some case studies that she might be aware of.
Thank you, Segwan. So my thinking is, what defines a successful project? And although I know I've been asked to point out a successful project, I was recently on a judging panel. So for not wanting to call out any specific projects, I thought I would rather focus more on what defines a successful project very briefly, and encourage our delegates to consider topics around and measurements around, in terms of was the project on time? Were methods around digitalization perhaps used to save time on the project? That is perhaps something that one could consider in terms of a successful project. Was the project involved with upskilling communities? How were neighboring communities involved in actually completing that project? And what is the legacy that project leaves in terms of corporate social investment once that project is completed? One needs to consider things such as the health and safety. What are the number of health and safety cases, or cases of no injury time? And in terms of innovation and also the environmental impact that the project actually has on the environment within which the project was conducted on. Something else that I would encourage one to look at before one says if it's a successful project or not is also about the sustainability of the project and that impact that it has. In particular, yes, fine, the timing and all of that is also obviously extremely important in terms of the consideration of success. But if one looks at the quantifiable time and the cost and the quality, we can all look at, was it on time, but in time in relation to what? And I think those for me are really important criteria to look at. So those were the items for me that stood out the most when looking at the judging that I had to do. And I think my colleagues, when they give their examples, will most certainly be able to have pointed out some really successful projects. So thank you, Segwan, for that opportunity to go through those.
All right, thank you very much, Petra. I'll just go on to the next person. I'll round everything up at the end. Claire, please.
Great, thanks, Sagan. And I think perhaps what I'm going to say complements what Petra said, because I'm going to look not at the implementation of a project and the outcomes in implementation, but how you get to a point where a project is implemented, and looking specifically more at the procurement processes. So there are a few very good examples of projects that I think are successful, but the project that I'm familiar with, and it's a project that's been running for many years, for certainly over a decade, is the Gautrain Rapid Rail Link PPP between Johannesburg and Pretoria and the airport in South Africa. And I just want to point out a couple of things of why I think this project was a success in getting to financial close. And these, I think, are things that really do apply to all projects across the continent. The first thing is that there was a well-prepared procurement process. And because of that, it attracted credible bidders and interest from lenders. And that's really important to get a reputable selection of bidders bidding for your projects, because you know then that you've got something that that is certainly has legs and can take you through the implementation, not without headaches, but certainly that's an important part of it. And obviously getting in credible bidders means getting in credible funders as well for a project. Really practical things, but on that particular project, the government stuck to its timelines. It had a procurement schedule, and it set out clearly in that schedule when certain activities would take place in the procurement process, and by and large, it stuck to that schedule. And I think that's really important, just to keep up bidder momentum and interest in a process. We've been involved in so many projects where the procurement documents have gone out, it started, and then it just fades into obliteration. There's just you never hear anything. So I think professionalism around sticking to timelines in the procurement process is really key as well. The last point really to say on this, and it's a really critical one, it's not easily achieved, but apart from obviously having political support within government for a project, it's really important for governments to be sensible about how risks are allocated contractually in an agreement, whether it's a PPP agreement or a construction agreement, and to obviously the usual principle of having the party best placed to manage the risk be allocated the risk. So often we see project documents that come out of authorities that just really put unnecessary and really impractical burdens on the private sector, or vice versa. So it's really important to have well thought through documents, governments knowing what risks they should take on, what they're best placed to manage, and what they can transfer over to the private sector as well. And I think for Gautrain, it ticked most of those boxes, if not all of them. And the result was that the project got to financial close. It's been operating for over 15 years, and it's a very successful example of where there's been a healthy and good partnership between the public and the private sector. Thanks, Sagan.
Yep, thank you very much, Claire. I'll now call on Lucy.
Thank you, Segun. So on my side, what I'm going to look to talk about really is again, it's a South African example, the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Program. I won't single out a specific project, but I think the principles that were embedded in the program enabled a number of successful projects, and overall, it has been a successful program to date. So why do I say it's successful in terms of the delivery of the individual projects? I think first thing, and I'm putting on a lender's hat as I speak, from my perspective, the regulatory framework was very robust. So as a lender, as you entered into any of the projects within the program, you knew exactly what you're getting into from a legal stroke regulatory framework. And that's critical for us as lenders, because we need to be sure that there'll be no challenges as you go down the road. Linked to that is a procurement process. Then the other issue is really similar to what Claire said. There were very many competent bidders that came out of the process that managed to deliver the projects on time and on budget and within the desired quality. And that again is due to the competence of the parties that actually executed on the projects. So as a lender again, there was no anxiety in terms of, is this going to be completed on time? Because as we did the first ones, they were completed on time. The second ones were completed on time. So it gave a lot of confidence that these projects are actually going to be completed on time because of the competence of the parties. And obviously for a lender, the last thing you want to hear is about cost overruns, because it's a very difficult discussion to have in terms of where the additional funds are going to come from. And those projects were actually completed within budget. And the quality thereof is also been very good. If I put on my development finance hat as well, from a development perspective, the development outcomes were very good in the sense that there was a lot of focus paid on the outcomes for the communities. Most of these projects, renewable projects, are on areas where communities are, and therefore there was a lot of emphasis to make sure they were involved and they continue to be involved for the long term, not just a once-off involvement, but programs developed to ensure that those communities there are involved in the long term. Secondly, there was a lot of emphasis also on making sure that the local participants in the country involved in the program, the empowerment angle, and that was critical and it was a key criteria. And so ensuring that the local players are able to participate both at an implementation level, but also at a shareholding level of the companies was important. And that helped it to be successful because those are the criteria that enable sustainability to be maintained. It's not only important to deliver the project as a once-off, but also to ensure that in the next 20 or 15 or 10 years, the project is still sustainable because the ecosystem you've developed is sustainable. And also there was a lot of emphasis on the environmental outcomes, and that again links to sustainability and impact. So that's what I can say in a nutshell in terms of what has made that program and the projects within the program successful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucy. I'll now call on Igwan.
Thank you, Chegu. Thank you so much. During the COVID, we had the lockdown, and the construction industry was badly affected because movement was restricted and it was difficult to execute projects at the time. We had logistic challenges, trucks moving materials from city to city, had to have a special pass to move from one city to another. There was also the heavy reliance on imported stuff. We're talking about education, we're talking about food, we're talking about healthcare in Nigeria, I speak. And I'm sure a lot of Africa, there's also a lot of reliance on imported services and goods. So this project came up was to help to meet one of the SDG goals, goal number 2, that aims at ending hunger and to bring about food security. A lot of the chicken that is consumed in Nigeria is imported because they don't have enough feed to grow the chickens. So this project was a joint venture between the Nigerian Soviet Investment Authority and a financier from the Netherlands. And they came up with this project to build this feed mill. Not just build the feed mill, they also had the input coming from farms nearby. So the communities were empowered. So they aggregated all the materials and they were creating food for these chickens. And they were able to do that. They have about 140,000 tons per annum. They are producing about 140,000 tons. And they have a 2-year projection already sold out. And with that, Nigeria can reduce the importation of chicken. And that way we can conserve a much needed foreign exchange. I'm sure a lot of you know what's happening to the foreign exchange in Nigeria now. The Nigerian naira is losing so much value because we don't have foreign exchange. So hopefully this project has created jobs. Because of COVID, we couldn't finish on time. It was built by my company, by the way. We couldn't finish on time. We lost some time. But then we were able to meet the quality and we were able to work within budget despite the delays. So in my opinion, the project has been successful because it has created jobs. He has helped to improve the food security, helped to conserve scarce foreign exchange, and they've impacted the community in which they operate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igwan. Now I'll call on Jose.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the colleagues have all, in a way, mentioned most of the important, let's say, elements that do make up and constitute, some of the examples and that are in my mind around successful projects. There's no doubt that it's got to be broken up. I think the procurement process is fundamental, and we are often experiencing in the continent extremely long procurement processes. In fact, we often engage the funding agencies around our discomfort with the procurement processes. We are keeping very good data around how long it takes, really from let's say the fact that the project is born up to when it starts to get executed. And we often find that is probably on average around 18 months. So the procurement processes often also hamper the progress of projects. So when we as engineers have designed it and planned it, by the time it gets implemented, some of the conditions change, and that makes it more costly, and that makes it more difficult to implement, to negotiate with the contractors, and so on. So I think if I can mention maybe two, I've got many examples of projects that I think were successful, and for what reasons they were successful, but also successful being mentioning that there were things that went wrong that really helped us to correct in other projects. So we many years ago we started looking at the development of the Maputo corridor. That was the whole transport corridor that leaves Johannesburg right up to the Maputo port. And I was a young engineer back then, very involved with the early work on the ground and so forth. And I think if I can take some positives out of that, was first of all in the procurement process there, and in the whole thinking of the project, there was a huge commitment. So not only from government, but also for all the stakeholders and players, there was commitment to get this done, to do it. It was difficult. It was a transfrontier project. It's a first time that a concessionaire was working through a border post, and it really. I was really quite enthusiastic about how we went about to get both governments, to everybody to work together. And I think fundamentally one of the important factors that played a role was the professionalism, the team of professionals that were involved in really creating the gel so that the project could be executed. And really within the execution, I think there was also the fact that there was capacity. The contractors were good. They knew what to do. Good planning, good designs. That really worked very well. And perhaps to compare it to others, the agility with which materials were imported, brought onto site, was a lot better. So I just want to use another project. I did a very large project that lasted 20 years, and that was the Nova Vida housing project in Angola, which started at the end of 1999, still in the middle of hostilities. The country was going through a very, very difficult phase. And again, they brought together very good professionals. They brought together, they had money, so the finance was in place. And there was a strong need to do it quickly. In fact, what was quite interesting, that project started by being implemented through the military house. So the military were involved. And again, to me, that created the agility, that created the speed, that created the commitment. We were all very responded daily in a very military way. And it really worked out. So I think procurement process was good there, the execution, the contractors were good. And at the end of the day, I think fundamentally you do ask yourself, what is it that this project brought to the community in general? Did the people's lives really improve? And I think Nova Vida was certainly one of those that from nothing, from real big challenges in terms of housing. Today, 60,000 people are living in that area. There's schools, there's universities, there are shopping centers, and people have made a life out of it, out of an area that was created to improve their lives. I think that was very positive. What I can see in the long term is the need to do the maintenance, and that part hasn't been brought in yet. And sometimes we are not sensitive enough that maintenance of infrastructure is fundamental for us to keep it sustainable. If we let infrastructure completely collapse and you have to do it from new, it is a lot more costly and difficult to sustain. So I think just there was a very quick mention of some of the thoughts that I've got in my mind in terms of what projects are examples and successful elements that participate in project execution to make it successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. And now I'll call on Dr. Bunshaki.
Yeah, thank you very much, Segun, and thank you, Jose, and my other colleagues. I'll just focus purely looking at it from investability of the project. This project that I'm talking about is called Azura Power Project. It is in Edo State in Nigeria. The role that I have there as the chair of the investment committee, the investors are numerous, and also our role there is very much as a chair of the investment committee is to see, is this an investable asset or not? The entity that I'm operating on behalf is called ARM Harriet, and it's a combination of Harriet from South Africa, from ARM in Nigeria, who are member of the consortium to deliver the asset. So if I put my spectacle on as to what was the main success right out of him, I started from the sponsorship. The sponsor of the project was high caliber individual who knew exactly about the project, know what the objective and the vision was. I looked at issue about, what I call sponsor, which is the state and the federal government. The state and federal government knew that this is groundbreaking for a PPP power project in Nigeria. Having the offtake, agreement in place was absolutely imperative. Guarantee, opportunity in terms of, what the stakeholder will do was critical. So structuring the project was very, very critical. I heard my colleagues talking about bankability. My role and the role of the investment committee is to look at, is this project bankable? From the point of view of technical, market, legal, regulatory, offtake, and essentially to decide, when is the best time to exit. Because a lot of people look into project with emotion. Private equity goes into project with a clear entry strategy and exit strategy. And what we had to do is to look at, do we think if we put our money on this project, yes, we can deliver the project, be part of that project, ensure the project is delivered to time, to cost, and to quality. And on top of that, make sure that at least the offtake guarantee is in place for us to be able to get a reward. And my point to bring out of this is, well, the sponsor of the project was quite fundamental. Having the right PPP agreements in place was important. Going through the due diligence process that was required from the appointment of the consultant, the appointment of the contractor, the supplier, the various elements of it that comes is critical. From ESG point of view, to understand that we're engaging the local stakeholders, that there is something in there for them in terms of employment, creation of opportunity, and also to make sure that, in the process of what we do, that, there is an element of actually guarantee the offtake. And I think when the project was completed, it was completed on time. Having said that, it took nearly 2 years in trying to figure out that project. But once all the agreements were in place, the project was completed within 3.5 years. And actually, when the project was completed, a lot of the local people were excited that they create employment. And also that when we got to the point that we only need to create availability, the offtake is really up to the federal government. But the government was keen that we were able to deliver before the targeted completion date, and we were able to get revenue in. And after 2 years of the project completion, we exited with a good multiple, as an investor, because you have to look at it from that point of view. But the essence of this is not about making money only, it's using that money to create other opportunities to invest. And we were very pleased that we went in. The federal government were very cooperative. The state government were cooperative. The local chiefs and people were very cooperative. The legacy of the project itself was very exciting. It created employment and all the process. And because it's an EPC contract, we also have the O&M contract tag onto that to make sure at least the issue that Jose was talking about, which is operation and maintenance of the asset, was guaranteed. Because without that, and if you are, unable to deliver the service level agreement, you don't have income coming through. So my take on it, was very successful, and it was a pioneer project in Nigeria, and other projects are looking at that. We've now gone up to look at other projects in Lagos, where we are looking at a power project and exactly the same structure. But the key point for me was we were able to structure that project, get like African Development Bank to come on board, get other private equity to come on board. And we did that deal on 1585, 15%, equity, 85 debt, which is very unusual in Nigeria, but we got it out of the way. And I was very pleased I was party to that particular contract. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ogunshaki, and thanks to all the panelists for those excellent examples of successful projects, or what constitutes success in infrastructure and construction projects in Africa. I won't take much time rounding off because we're running slightly behind time, but I can't but sort of comment on some of the issues or some of the points that have been raised. Petra talked about sort of a number of criteria by which successful projects are now being looked, or by which projects are now being looked as being successful in Africa, by which success is being measured. And I think for me, some of the interesting ones were the application of technology. She talked about digitalization, applying technology to projects to enable the project to come in on time. She talked about innovation in projects, but I think very important, which sort of tallied with what a number of the other panelists spoke about, was the issue of the community impact of the projects, the legacy of the projects, which I think that came across right across the board in terms of successful projects. Something else that came across quite consistently was the issue of a well-prepared procurement process, which Claire sort of first brought up. And it was interesting to see how the issue of a well-prepared procurement process fed into professionalism, how that fed into having a credible, a bankable project, how that fed into getting finance, and how that sort of flowed on, when the other speakers talked about, about successful projects. Procurement is a very, very important part, sort of the construction value chain. And I think that ties in again with something that Lucy brought up in terms of the regulatory framework, because typically the regulatory framework that is the genesis or the origin of good procurement. And again, that ties back into our earlier discussions about leadership in the industry. So very, very interesting issues brought up by the panelists there in terms of successful projects, and they mentioned quite a number of successful projects across Africa there. All right, we'll now move on and go on to the next sort of segment. And in this segment, I'm actually going to go around to all the panelists, and I'll be asking each panelist one specific question. And that question is this: if they had the opportunity and the authority to do so, what is that one thing that they would change in the construction industry in Africa? If they had the opportunity, they had the authority to do so, just to tell me that one thing that they would change. And this time I'll start with Lucy.
Thank you, Segun, for that question. We've spoken about many things, but I think the one thing that comes to mind is really if we could just get the procurement processes and regulatory frameworks to be done properly. I think that could open up a lot of opportunities and a lot of investment.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucy. Claire?
Thank you, Segun. Thanks very much. Yes, as Lucy said, lots of really important ideas. I suppose for me, it's really simple. I think it's about when governments plan their infrastructure projects to plan sensibly, to know what should be remain a government-funded on-budget project and what is suitable for private sector finance. And that's, I'm coming particularly from a concessions PPP perspective. So often we see projects that are actually just not suitable for private sector investment. And so I think that if there is some sensible planning around government's projects, what they should do, where the private sector can complement them, that would be a good start. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Call on Petra.
Thank you, Sigrid. I think for me, the most important aspect is back down to the grassroots level of more of a link between the education institutions and employers to almost have a mandatory return to apprenticeships or internships, also known as mentorships, so that we're having more of a continuation of actual training and grassroots feeding through into the start of one's career. And that leads back to the introduction of professional memberships and professionalism of the actual industry. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Petra. Jose?
Thanks. I'm going to be a lot more basic around what I would change because I'm feeling it very much in the skin as we implement projects, and this is the constraint around agility in the continent, and Claire did mention and talk about the African Free Trade Agreement. Yes, there has been a positive trend towards it, and it will certainly help us. I mean, if you read it and we really implement that free trade agreement, we should get a miraculous change in our supply chain for construction projects and also costs. But it is not being implemented. It's just slightly here and there, but very, very much. So if I could change something, would really be these borders that have become difficult and really make our projects so much expensive. It really makes the timing of delivery of equipment, particularly on energy projects, it's very, very complicated in the landlocked countries inside the continent. So if I had a magic wand, would be for a while to just remove these border constraints that we could get projects going and stimulating projects. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jose. That was very interesting. Ibuan.
Thank you so much, Segun. If I had the power to do one thing, I will create incentives for foreign companies who collaborate with indigenous companies in Africa. That way, there will be proper technological transfer, there will be training, there will be empowerment. And, you know, this issue of people going back, living to the West, might not be that bad because they will be trained, and in exchange they will train others and they will go back and forth. That way you have better quality personnel working on the continent, and they might not be that rush to leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ibuan. And lastly, I'll call on Dr. Ogunshaki.
I've only got one word to say, really. Is capacity building across the whole continent.
Yeah.
We have the talent, we have the skill, we just need to believe in ourselves, and that comes through from my old comment about leadership. If we can understand that for every $1 we invest in construction has a multiple impact down the line, and then building capacity, having a pipeline of projects and a well thought through program of investment across our whole infrastructure, will get us far. Because at the end of the day, we can actually be an outsourcing center. We can do a lot of design in Africa for work to be done in different parts of the world. We don't have to leave Africa for it if we believe in ourselves. So it's really, to me, it's about capacity build across the whole continent, not relying on contractors from abroad, not relying on money from abroad. We could do it. We just have to have that vision. It's a big one.
Thank you, Dr. Gunshaki. Well, those are very, very interesting insights from all the panelists. Lucy talked about the procurement process, which is what she would change. Claire talked about governments planning properly, planning sensibly, and distinguishing properly between what should be government finance versus private sector, involved projects. Petra talked about the link between educational institutions and employers, and how that sort of leads on to professionalism in the industry. Jose talked about agility. In particular, he mentioned the free trade agreement. But I think he was talking particularly about the issue of borders, the problem, cross-border sort of logistics, on the continent. Ibwan talked about incentives for foreign companies to collaborate with local companies and linked that with his earlier comment as well about talent migration. And last but not the least, Dr. Gunshaki talked about capacity building and how with proper builds up developed capacity, we can sort of address most of the issues that we've talked about this evening. All right. Now we sort of come to the last segment where we round off our discussions. And right now, so we've talked about the trends, opportunities, challenges in the industry. We've talked about a vision for the future of the construction industry in Africa. And right now we're going to call on Dr. Gunshaki to give us his perspectives on strategies to implement to get to a desired future state of excellence in the construction industry in Africa, based on his experience being at the center of the construction industry on the global stage. Dr. Gunshaki, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I do not believe that I have all the solution for African, challenge, but I do believe collectively we are stronger. Let me start with the premises that we often look at the issue about geopolitical issue. We look across the whole footprint of Africa. You will see the Chinese, you see the Germans, you see the French and everybody there. And really, there is no indigenous individual that drives issues. So I've built on the world, our capacity, and I do believe strongly that's the way forward. And let me just, share some thought with you along that line. I do know for sure that, if we have the right infrastructure in Africa, then it's easy for us to achieve a lot of things we want to achieve. We talked extensively about the shortage in terms of the infrastructure in Africa, the outlook from the construction Africa, in terms of the market and the challenges is quite obvious. The fastest growing continent in the whole world, it is Africa. The youngest populated country is in Africa. We have a lot of talented people in Africa, across the whole of Africa. And I hear earlier about people migrating to different. The reason why they're migrating is very simple, because there is nothing at home to encourage them to stay there. Whether it is the fluctuation of the economy, the currency, is because our market, our industry is not stable and people want good areas. So my vision for Africa is African solution for African challenge. We often rely on third-party world to tell us what we need to do. I think it's about time we just need to look at the example where things have been done very well. Shegu and I were in Singapore not too long ago. And in Singapore is very exemplar of a leading country. It's a tiny country by population, but it actually exemplified themselves with a number of key attributes. And I want to share those attributes because it helps us to move forward. When Singapore was formed, they had 3 mantras. It wasn't about religion, it wasn't about faith. It was about getting the best of the best people in the world to be in Singapore. It was also about making sure that whatever they do actually is seen to be the best in the world and constantly benchmarking themselves as to how we can improve on that. But ultimately also to make sure that it attracts the best people in the world to come to that. Those premises are fundamental. So why do I look at that? I'm looking about the issue within Africa. How do we build standard that we know that is exemplar? My view on it is we've got to start from the grassroots. We know the needs of Africa. We know what we need to do. There's a big challenge about skill. There's a big challenge about finance. There's a big challenge for capability. There's a big challenge of resources. And I do believe that against that backdrop is having a fantastic standard that we can exemplify. Now, I'm sitting there in Geneva, and I'm representing FIDIC. And for those who doesn't know who FIDIC is, you must have come across FIDIC contract in one way or the other, everything you do. Now, FIDIC represents the consulting engineer, but the output of FIDIC is actually what everybody talks about in the construction industry. Whether you are MDB, whether you are engineer, whether you're a contractor, whether you're a constructor, whether you're investors, you look at standard. And I do believe strongly that, having a standard will help us to move forward. And the reason for that is very simple. We need to understand what skill set do we need to help us to migrate, because skill is very important in what we do, whether it's financing, banking. And I know that when we look back in Africa, there are good examples of things that we've done very well. Let's take the banking sector. We reform our banking sector. It's one of the best in the world. Wherever I am, I can transact with Nigerian bank account anywhere around the world. You look at the issue to do with, film industry, we've done very well in the film industry. You look at the IT, we've done very well. We look at telecommunication, we've done very well. In the construction industry, we are still lacking. My view on it is that if there is a universal approach across the whole of Africa, that we adopt, the best-in-class standard. Of course, part of that is technical skill training. And I was very pleased to hear my friend from CIOB, which I'm a fellow of, that they are promoting that they're working with government. I'm also very pleased to see my friend from the financial institution talking about bankability, setting a standard that we need to follow so that everybody understands what makes project bankable is very important. Then adopting a proper procurement system that is transparent and ensure, people that, there is no leakage in the process is also very critical. But against that backdrop is the ability to deliver. And Segun, we know this, you can have the best engineer, you can have the best constructor, you can have the best, equipment, you can have the best, things will change during construction process. Managing that process is extremely important. Having the rules and the procedure in place is very important. So my take on it is that I believe we have the power and we have the base to do it. We just have to understand that. My recommendation is we need to look at a standard that is accepted across the whole of Africa. Now, this is a big vision, but if it's not, at least in one country and one sub-region, there must be something we need to help. If you go to EU, there is a standard that is being pursued across the whole of EU. Everybody knows what it is. And if we need to move forward, we should not be relying on Chinese standard being imposed on us. I am strong about it. We should not be relying on any foreign standard being imposed on us. It's about adopting the best standard in the world and make sure we will live up to it, we'll breathe it, and we push that down the line for the young one coming in to be able to be the best that we can. So, Segun, I'm handing over to you. That my recommendation, of course, I will recommend that we adopt FIDIC standard. But we are also qualifying people as an educator, as a consulting engineer, as a consulting practitioner. That's just one part of it. There is other element of it in the financing, in the way you look at project. There's other part of it in the education and training. And I do believe standard is very important. Lack of standard means that we're always going through the bush without knowing where we're heading through. So my fellow colleague, my advice is we need to build standard, we need to build integrity, and we need to build, professionalism in what we do. I think with that in mind, we can be successful. But against that backdrop is having political stability, is having the leadership, and having the vision that, looking at projects today, it is legacy for us in future. There's a lot of projects around the world that have stand 200 years and they're still standing. I hear Jose talking about a project that is badly maintained. We need to walk away from that. We need to walk away from property, falling apart before they are completed. It's against having the Baxter standard. And I leave it that, collectively we're stronger. And I do believe that adopting international best standard and taking it down to the grassroots, not only can we use it for Africa, but we can be an exporter of that capability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ogunshakin. That was very, very insightful and very, very informative. We're actually running out of time. However, I would like to ask two of the other panelists. I didn't put that in before, but I just want to say, are there two panelists, or is there anybody who might want to make a comment on what Dr. Ogunshakin has said? No. Okay. All right. We'll just Oh yeah, I can see Ibuan, he's got his hand up. We can't hear you. You're muted, Ibuan.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So I'll speak about capacity building. I've run my business, Construction Kaiser, for 30 years. We turned 30 this year. Where I thought we'll be after 30 years is not where we are. I started as a young man full of fire. I was pushing, thinking that in 10 years we'll achieve the standards that we wanted to achieve. It's not been easy. So it's easier said than done. There's so many things lacking. So in spite of the political problems we're talking about, the lack of leadership, you are expected to thrive. Do you understand? You're expected to thrive. So sometimes you might need to get what you don't have to achieve what you want to achieve. And that's why I made those comments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ibuan. I don't think we have any other comments. No, we don't have. All right. We'll just go into question and answers. We are running out of time. I think we've kind of slightly running over the time. So I'll just take two questions and I'll sort of pass them on to the panelists. The first question is from Inkululeko Sedibe. And the question is, how do we intend to integrate CIOB into TVET colleges in South Africa, as the organization is currently mainly catering to universities? However, it's more often than not, it's the university students that are actually running the projects, and students from TVET are forming on site. So I think the question is really, how do we intend to integrate CIOB into the TVET college? And I'll call on Petra to address that.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So we actually have launched our technical membership grade called Tech CIOB, which will be suitable for students and members that are professionals that are that haven't studied through university. So we currently are engaging with TVET colleges in South Africa and across Sub-Saharan Africa. So as I said, it is a new grade. And it will open up the opportunity for technically skilled people to become professionally recognized across the globe, actually. And it's a wonderful opportunity to for these professionals to actually have this community and professional recognition. But I'm more than happy to link in with the person that asked the question if she has any further questions. And would like any further information after the webinar. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Petra. So in Kululeko, Petra has said that if you want further information on this, you can reach out to her and she will gladly provide you with information. Okay, the next question, which is going to be the last question, unfortunately, because we're running out of time, is that, are there funding models and opportunities that will support and facilitate training and research collaboration between universities overseas and African universities? Well, I'll pass that in the first instance to Lucy because it talks about funding. I know it's not necessarily infrastructure, but do you have any sort of comments on that, probably?
In terms of the funding that could be for projects, maybe you could just repeat second. The funding model.
Yeah. Yes, funding models that will support training, research collaboration between universities overseas and African universities. I know that's not really infrastructure finance, but it's finance, I don't know, sort of a regulatory thing.
Yeah, I don't know about funding models, but there's certainly funding that is available for types of projects, especially on the climate side, renewable energy side, and universities overseas that could be then be utilized for people who are local. So there are those opportunities there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you. I don't know. I know Dr. Mushaki is also sort of in the finance area. Perhaps he might have a comment here.
Yeah, very quick one. I think, my direction would be, I know the Royal Academy of Engineers in UK. They do a lot of collaboration, mainly within the Commonwealth countries, of which most parts of Africa and Sub-Saharan are very much into. And they encourage, scholarship or grant between two universities, between UK and African country universities. So if you want to, I'm prepared as a fellow of the Academy to introduce you to the grant people who can facilitate that. But the other point which I was going to mention, which is not already in place, in Singapore, as part of FIDICARE 110 years anniversary, we launched a new foundation, which is going to be in place from January next year. And part of that really is about capacity building, and that will cover individual, may also cover institution to institution. And we're looking at that, but hopefully that will come into operation at the end of Q1 in 2024. Thank you.
Right. I forgot to mention that the person that asked this question is David Stephen. David Stephen is the person that asked the question.
So David,
right.
please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be delighted to guide you towards the Institute of, the fellow of the Academy in UK, and they can guide you on whatever grant is available. But I'm not so sure if there's anything else I can do beyond that. But after Q1 2024, please reach out. We may have something in play as FIDIC.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gunshaki. One final question, because this is very pertinent to something that has been raised here, and this is going to go to Igwan. This is from Huagirimana Faustin, and he's asking, how can we stop losing skilled laborers, especially youth from African countries to Europe and the other side of the world? Igwan, what's your idea on that?
So on this point, I agree with Dr. Gunshaki. It's leadership. Create a better environment for them here, and there will be no reason for them to go across.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, sorry. Yep. Sorry.
I said absolutely.
Okay. Correct. All right. Thank you, Igban. Now, on that point, we come to the end of the webinar. We'll be informing you of the date and details of the next webinar. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the distinguished panelists, and thank you to the audience. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks very much. Thanks for organizing it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks to my fellow panelists. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shegun.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.